something. Chair, the witness has had a lot of correspondence with Parliament, but the correspondence is not in the affidavit or the annexures. And yes, Chair, there are reports that he's given that are part of the evidence and the annexures, but the correspondence itself is not included, and we would seek an indulgence to prepare a supplementary affidavit because it is evidence that is in existence. So we would need to prepare that. And Chair, in addition, while I'm talking about a supplementary affidavit, during the course of last week in preparation for coming here, a number of affidavits were received from parties that had been implicated by Mr. Craythorne that he would need to respond to. So he would need to prepare a supplementary affidavit in response to those as well.
Okay, but that correspondence, Mr. Craythorne, exists, it's there somewhere at home or your office.
It's even on a machine here, Chairperson, but it would be awkward and time consuming to
deal with it.
To deal with it.
First preparing. Okay, no, that's in order. So what will be necessary, therefore, would be a supplementary affidavit, as Ms. Bia says, maybe a separate supplementary affidavit, separate from any other affidavit that Mr. Craythorne may prepare to respond to other parties who have filed affidavits. Simply a special affidavit that deals with this particular issue and refers to correspondence, and then the copies of the correspondence can be attached, dealing with it very systematically to say, on this date, this is what we wrote to Parliament about, this is what they said in response, or they said nothing, then on such and such a date, we wrote about the same thing or about something else, again, there was no response, or this is the response we gave, such and such a date, we went there, we met with so-and-so, we raised our issues, but nothing happened after that, or this is what we were promised, but nothing came of it. That kind of systematic narration of the issues. Okay, no, that's fine. Then we don't need to deal with it today.
Yes.
And that affidavit will be finished, and then a decision can be taken at that stage whether it would be necessary for Mr. Craythorne to come back and give oral evidence about it. It may be that the affidavit will be enough, and that it can then be given to the relevant people in Parliament to say, respond to this affidavit, to these allegations, and then we take it from there.
Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Perfect.
Okay, no, that's all right. Then it means I should excuse you now, Mr. Craythorne. Thank you very much for having come to give evidence, and if necessary, we'll ask you to come back, but if possible, if at all possible, we'll try and avoid that. But if necessary, we will ask you to come back. But thank you very much. You are now excused. Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Where is the... Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Mr. Bam, I'm sorry. I saw you in the morning, but I think I didn't see you now. Yes.
In this commission, I always try to keep out of the right. But Mr. Chair, can I just briefly state that on behalf of the State Diamond Trader, you may be familiar with the affidavit that we filed on behalf by Mr. Munguni on behalf of the SDT.
Okay, no, I haven't seen it.
But it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
We've listened over a day and a half carefully to Mr. Craythorne's evidence. We've considered the paragraphs we've been referred to in the notice, and we've come to the conclusion that there's no need for the SDT to trouble this commission with any cross-examination. And I thought I'd just place that on record. With that, may I ask if we may be excused?
Yes, no, thank you very much, Mr. Bam. You are excused.
I'm grateful, thank you.
always say that the advantage of having experienced counsel representing parties is because experienced counsel knows the issues that are important, and they won't want to just cross-examine for the sake of cross-examining.
I'm glad you say so. My wife doesn't always agree. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
You are excused. Thank you, Mr. Bam. Is the Eskom work stream team here? Mr. Selega is supposed to be here.
Doesn't appear so at the moment, but the junior is present.
Solicitor, do you know anything?
Chair, in addition, they need a short adjournment because the witness will be testifying via media. So,
Well, the evidence leader must be here first. Is his junior here?
yes.
Yeah, please come forward, tell me what's happening. Yes, good afternoon. Yes, switch on the mic.
Sir, I must apologize for myself. I'm not entirely sure why he's not present. We had made arrangements to meet at the venue by 1, so I did send him a message. I assume he's driving. But Chair, may we ask for a short adjournment so that I could call him telephonically to find out where his whereabouts, as well as the fact it might give us a short opportunity just to link up with the witness who's not going to be present.
Yeah. Is that Ms. Datta?
Yes, Dr. Ayanda Nteta.
Yes. I assume that Rule 33 notices were served quite a long time ago with regard to her evidence because she was going to testify some weeks ago.
Indeed so. She was
Yes.
going to testify last year, December, and
Yeah.
then there was, it was in the last week, so.
Yeah, okay, all right. No, that's fine. Then we are going to adjourn, but I need to talk to Ms. Beer before we adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Beer, do you want to come back to the podium? In terms of the way forward with regard to Alex Cole, I know that you have a commitment that makes you unavailable from a certain date.
Yes, Chair.
Is it from the 18th
Yes, it's from Monday
up to when?
until the 22nd, 21st of February.
Yes. So you would only be available after that to finish whatever needs to be finished in regard to Alex Cole?
Yes, Chair, I would not be,
Yeah.
it would not be proper for me to be engaged.
No, I accept that you
Yes.
won't be able to.
Yes.
I was just making sure that you will be available after.
Oh,
Okay, so the witnesses that you still have are Mr. Bishop,
and Mr. Decker,
then Mr. Decker,
and then the implicated parties.
You need to have Mr. Customs,
Mr. Beggars,
Koraba, and Mr. Bagas.
yes,
Certainly, we need to have their affidavits.
yes,
And then we can see where there might be no need for oral evidence and where there might be need, but we certainly need to have all of those in as soon as possible. I would like I would like that all attempts be made to make sure that by end of January, all those affidavits are in. And obviously, when they come in, copies need to be given to people like Mr. Creighton and maybe Mr. Bishop and whoever whose evidence might be disputed by those people
Yes.
in certain respects, so that we reach a point where we say all affidavits are in and everybody has commented on everybody's versions that relate
Yes,
to
Chair.
them. And then we can take it from there.
Yes, Chair, thank you very much. We will attend to that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to hear in terms of the rest of the week as far as the work stream, the Eskom work stream is concerned. It may well be that there might be days this week when they are not going to be able to use. Now, if that were to happen, subject to your own commitments for this week, it might be something to think about whether Mr. Peter Bishop could be brought in when a day becomes available or half a day to come in and give his evidence. But if your situation doesn't permit, because that was not in the original plan, that's fine, I'll understand. Then Mr. Bishop can give his evidence after you have become available.
Thank you, Chair. It would not be possible.
It would not be possible.
Yes.
Okay, no, that's all right. I'm going to take a 10 minutes adjournment to enable the Eskom work stream to get ready. We adjourn.
Dr. O, wait, anyone, can you please pick up? Unmute the Tumza. To me, unmute. Thank you. Dr. O, wait, anyone can hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. O. Thank you. Dr. Nteta.
Hello.
Thank you. Tumza. Good afternoon, Dr. Datta.
Good afternoon.
Can you hear us clearly, ma'am?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I'm Reverend Stemela. I'm just testing your setting and stuff. Will you please just change your position, put your light on, and the
Okay.
curtain is just giving us a blurry look.
You will advise if you want my audio on or off.
The order is now on, ma'am.
I
That's
mean,
fine.
not audio, camera.
Yes, your camera is on, but we request that if you can put your lights on and close your curtain, because your curtain is giving a reflection, ma'am. Just switch your lights on, because we can't see you. The judge has to see you. Can you please?
I don't know if you were talking because I could not hear. I just heard some noise, but I did not hear what you said.
Okay, let me repeat again, Dr. Nteta. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Perfect.
Thank you
Yes.
so much. I was requesting if you can please switch on your lights and close the curtain on your right because it's giving us a reflection. Just switch on your lights. Thank you. And switch on your lights, please.
I'm just going to disappear from the camera for a second.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Okay, ma'am.
Is that better?
It is not better.
I just realized that perhaps what I'm doing, I hope it's not on national TV.
The live stream, I think, is continuing. We'll see how it goes. But it's fine. What we're saying is that the curtain on your right, ma'am, is still giving us a reflection. That one is. So if you can move your position, it will be much better.
Okay.
Because that's where the reflection
Okay.
comes from. Thank you so much. That looks much perfect, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. That's super. That's super. I just want to warn you that you won't be able to see the chairperson and the evidence leader, but we can see you very clearly.
Okay.
Can you hear us now from your side, ma'am?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so
Yes, I
much.
can.
Yes. That's a perfect position. Thank you so much. The evidence leader will come any time from now, and the chairperson will come in.
Okay, all right. I didn't hear your answer. I'm assuming that you do want my camera on.
You can switch off your camera now, but when we are about to resume, we will give you a thing. You can mute your camera and mute your microphone as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Nteta.
Okay.
Enkosi kakhulu,
Thank you.
siyabulela. Unmute, Tommy. Unmute. I'll check that. Ms. Nteta, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Yes, we are about to start, ma'am. I just want to check, are you going to be taking oath or affirmation, ma'am? Oath or affirmation?
I don't know.
The other one is a religious commitment.
What are sorry, one of them is a?
The other one is a religious commitment and is non-religious. So help me God, or it's real affirm. So which one will you choose?
Religious.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much. We're about to start, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay.
On the stand, please. All rise.
Your leader is not here. I'm told she said she's still going to be about 10 minutes. Junior counsel is supposed to be always ready to take over. I want you to take over. Let's continue. Your leader can take over when he arrives, if that's fine, but otherwise you can lead. Okay.
Indeed, so Chair.
I don't have any file here. But there might be no reason why you might not lead the witness up to the end. Yes. Are you ready?
Chair, I'm ready.
Yes.
The witness that we're calling is Dr. Ayanda Nteta.
Okay.
If we may
Are we
start.
going to use Eskom bundle 14?
Indeed so, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all right. And the next witness is Ayanda Nteta.
That's correct.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, we've also indicated on the previous occasion that this witness is situated in Durban.
Yeah.
As a result thereto, we have requested her evidence be led remotely via Teams or Zoom. She is online.
Yeah, no, I was told about the request and I authorized that she can give evidence via video link. And before you start leading her, do you want to assist the public by just telling me where her evidence fits in the whole Eskom saga?
Indeed so.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, this witness, at the time or her evidence is being led, she was the acting senior manager of fuel resources at Eskom in the period of March 2015, or from April 2015. Her evidence revolves around the coal supply agreements. So it's basically the Tegeta transactions in respect of OCH, which is the Optimum Coal Mines, as well as the prepayment transactions, which those are the two areas that her evidence in essence will cover.
Yes, okay. No, that's fine. Solicitor, please administer the oath of affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
Ayanda Nteta.
Do you have any objections to taking the prescribed oath?
I do not.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you. Her screen needs to be moved a bit. I don't think it is where you usually have the screen. Yes, but can you move her screen a bit? Or I think normally it's a little towards that side, yeah. Is it in the same position? Or the room is different? If you move the screen, what will happen? If you move it towards yes, like that, it shouldn't affect her. Okay, I think that's much better, yeah. Okay, all right. Okay, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I must apologize. Before you walked in, I'm not sure if the witness has the links of the files because I need to take her through her statement.
Yes, you can check with her.
Dr. Nteta, an email link was sent to you shortly. Have you had a chance to open it?
I don't know if your voice is naturally soft or low, or whether you should speak closer to the mic, or you should raise your voice. It's, try your best.
I will indeed.
Okay.
Dr. Nteta,
Oh, okay, I'm currently opening my emails.
Thank you. There should be two links that would have been sent to you. The first one would contain, it should say Exhibit Bundle 14, or it will read Exhibit U28.
Okay, I have not received either. The last email I've received is the meeting request.
Okay.
I'm refreshing my emails.
Thank you.
I do not have not received it. I am now going to look in I'm just trying to get now it has come through.
Okay, lovely. Would you be able to quickly
Exhibit U28. Okay.
And the next one should
I'm also
be
just getting the password, sorry. I'm just writing it down so that I...
No problem.
I'm entering the password. Okay. It's currently downloading. It indicates 1 minute left.
Thank you.
Is she going to be looking at the documents on a computer
Yes, Mr. Chair.
as opposed to hard copies?
Yes, we didn't have the opportunity to courier the documents down to Durban because it was a last-minute arrangement from Friday where we were confirmed that she would be testifying via the link. There's just one more bundle that she also has to download. It's in respect of the Tegeta reference, which would be...
When you refer to specific page numbers, will she have no problem identifying those?
It should be no problem, Mr. Chair.
Okay. all right.
Because it's basically our files that have been electronically uploaded.
Yeah.
So I'll quickly check
Yeah.
with her now to make sure she has the black and the red numbers.
Okay, all right.
Mr. Chair, she'll also have to download the Tegeta reference bundle, which would be...
Yeah.
So, Dr. Nteta, have you managed to secure the exhibit or Eskom bundle 14?
Okay, I've just downloaded is a U28 in Datta A affidavit and Eskom bundle 18.
Wonderful.
Is there a second one that I should be looking for?
No, Eskom bundle 18 is the second bundle. That should read the Tegeta reference
Okay,
bundle.
that should. Okay. I'm opening it. Eskom bundle 18. It is exhibit use, 34. Tegeta reference bundle, and you'd ask that, and there are there's writing in black, and there's also some writing
In red.
red. Yes.
That's indeed so. That is actually the two references, that's the electronic pagination for the exhibits that is used at the Commission. We will be referring to the black numbers, so the numbers on your left-hand side.
Okay.
On the document.
Okay, noted. All right.
Mr. Chair, my
Continue.
leader has just walked in.
Has he said he wants to take over? If he doesn't say that, you can continue.
He's nodded to me, indicating that he's willing to take over.
Okay. Well, continue while he's busy until he's ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Nteta, like I've indicated, we're using the black reference numbers. So if we look at U28, the first one, it starts on page, it says Eskom 14, which refers to the exhibit number or the reference, and then the page number is 63. So if you look at page 63 and go up to page 84, you confirm that is your statement?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Ma'am, if you turn then to page 84, you would see the affidavit was signed by yourself on the 5th of July 2020. You confirm that is correct?
Yes, I confirm the signature. The date I cannot see well, but I confirm the signature.
Well,
I see the stamp of the South African Police. Yes, the 5th of July. Yes.
well, the stamp of the South African Police reflects 5 July 2020, but
Yes.
the Commissioner of Oaths said that you certified that you acknowledged that you knew and understood the contents of the affidavit, which was signed and sworn before him at July, on the 5th day of June 2020. Is that July or is that something else? Do you see what I'm reading?
Yes, yes, sir,
Does
I
it
see
look-
what you are reading.
Does it look like July, or is it the name of a place that looks like July? Do you remember the place?
There are
where-
actually two.
You remember the place
Yeah,
where
the
you went?
Yes, the place was Midrand.
Yeah. So there's July, then there's June,
Yes,
and it can't be both.
yes.
What's your recollection? Was it July or June? Or you can't remember?
I can't remember. Right now, I'm inclined to say July because my signature in the above looks like it says 07.
Yes.
So I'm inclined to
Yeah.
say
July.
July.
Yeah. Okay, all right, continue.
I think a simple way to put it would be, ma'am, on the day that you signed your signature, do you remember being at the Midrand police station?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, I
So
do.
then you would have commissioned the statement in front of the commissioner at the police station, and the stamp would read 7
Yes, I
July.
do.
So I think it was just an error where they
Yes.
put in July, June. I think the statement was drafted around June, but signed in July. Great. Ma'am, as indicated that this is your affidavit to the commission, so for the record, you've confirmed it is yours, your signature, and it's your statement that you've provided. Can you state
Yes,
your...
I confirm.
Okay. For the record, would you be able to place your qualifications?
Just for the sake of completeness, do you confirm that the contents of the affidavit are, to the best of your knowledge and belief, true and correct?
Yes, I confirm that.
Yes.
Yes, I confirm.
Yes, continue.
Mr. Chair, my silk is asking if he may then now take over with the proceedings.
Okay, that's fine.
May I then be excused?
Yeah.
Thank you for the indulgence.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Yes, Mr. Slegger.
I apologize for the late arrival, Chairperson. I understood that the witness of this morning might take longer than discussed with my learned friend yesterday, but I was told that after 2 he was excused.
Well, when we started in the morning, I specifically said to Ms. Sibia that I would give her 2 hours to finish. And part of the reason why I mentioned that in the open hearing was so that wherever you may be, you would know, because you should be keeping an eye on what's happening in the proceedings. You should know that we were going to finish at about 12. So we didn't finish at 12, so I thought by 1 o'clock you would be here. 1 o'clock you were not here, so I thought at least when we come back at 2, you would be here, and then you were not here still. So later on I had to ask your junior to take over.
DCJ, I hardly watch, but when preparing,
Well, you had to watch if you wanted to, if you knew you were going to have to start after the witness has finished, who had started in the morning. You had to keep an eye or get somebody to tell you if something changed.
I was DCJ. I was.
Okay, all right. Let's continue.
Yes. DCJ, I've been observing on the issue of the signature of Dr. Nteta's affidavit. Dr. Nteta, on the last page of your affidavit, the commissioner has put a stamp, the South African Police Service, Supply Chain Management Midrand. The stamp shows a date of 5 July 2020. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
And then the date of 5 corresponds with what is handwritten on the oath, and the month of July, which is misplaced, is put, the month is written in the space for the place. Can you see that?
That has been covered.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So,
That has been covered by your junior.
thank you, Chair. So we can accept that your statement could have been commissioned on the 5th of July. Chairperson, for the purposes...
Your junior had just started asking her to deal with her qualifications, and when you took over,
Yes.
and she was still to deal with her qualifications.
Yeah. Chair, is it sufficient? The affidavit is in Exhibit U28.
The affidavit has not been admitted as
Yes.
yet, but the part you sought to cover has been covered. I think
Yes.
that if you
Wish to
ask me
admit it.
to have it admitted, that can be done, and then you can
Yes.
ask her about, then you can start asking her questions, starting with her employment history at Eskom and her qualifications.
Yes.
Do you want me to admit this affidavit?
Yes, Chair, it's Exhibit U28.1.
The affidavit of Ayanda Nteta, starting at page 63 of Eskom Bundle 14, is admitted together with its annexures as Exhibit U28.1.
Thank you, Chair. Chairperson, for the purposes of the audience, I could also briefly point out the issues on which Ms. Nteta will be testifying on. Could I do that? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
So Ms. Nteta is a former employee of Eskom, Chairperson. She was there in 2015 in the division of fuel, the unit of fuel sourcing within the division of primary energy. So she would have been responsible for fuel sourcing. The points that she's going to testify on mainly relates to the prepayment submission that was made for the prepayment of 659 million rand to Datta in April 2015. She will tell the chairperson that she was in fact the person who initiated the drafting of that submission which was ultimately signed by Mr. Koko and submitted to the BTC in a meeting of the 11th of April for approval. She will also tell the chairperson about her interactions with the Gupta family. In this case, specifically in her affidavit, she addresses her interaction with Mr. Tony Gupta. She will deal with, as well, her interaction with Mr. Ravindra Nath, who was the CEO of Tigeta at the time, and tell the chairperson how the transactions between Tigeta and Eskom in regard to Brakfontein and this particular transaction of 6.659 million came about. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Ms. Nteta, then, in regard to your qualifications, just by way of background and introduction, could you please tell the chairperson what your qualifications are?
Okay. I currently have a doctorate in business leadership, which I obtained from UNISA School of Business Leadership in Midrand.
I see that you say you also have qualifications in Masters in Business Leadership.
Yes, I have a master's in business leadership, obtained from the same institution. I also have a Bachelor of Arts degree, which is my undergraduate degree.
Yeah.
I assume you obtained your doctorate after you deposed to this affidavit?
Yes, I did,
Okay.
formally.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Dr. Nteta, I'll call you doctor then. When did you start at Eskom?
So I started at Eskom in June 2012, I believe it is. And I started as a senior manager within the fuel sourcing division, which falls within primary energy department.
As a senior manager?
Yes, as a senior manager.
I see that from your affidavit, you would have held this position from then June 2012 to about July 2015.
Yes, sir.
And what position did you occupy thereafter?
So after the position of senior manager, I was then in August 2015, I was the acting general manager, also within fuel sourcing, also within the primary energy division. And that was until February 2017, where I was then a senior general manager for primary energy division.
Thereafter?
A position that I held up until April 2018, I'm just trying to remember, where I then left the employ of Eskom.
Yeah. But do you have your affidavit in front of you?
Yes, I'm just trying to get to that.
Yeah, that's in Eskom Bundle 14, Eskom Bundle 1.4.
Yes, sir.
It's on page 64, which is the black numbers on the left, top left-hand corner.
Yes. Yes, I have that. I now have that in front of me.
Thank you. So the period of interest for present purposes is the one from August 2015 to January 2017, when you were the acting GM fuel sourcing.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Well, we could actually take it back to June 2012 because of my next question. When tell the chairperson, when did you have engagements or interactions with the Gupta family or members of the family?
So my interactions with them, I've indicated that I do not recall the exact date, but it would have been, if I was to put a line in the sand, after they had obtained the Braakfontein coal supply agreement, which they were awarded in, I think it was 2015, where they were awarded that particular agreement.
Yes, now I've looked at the evidence, even your affidavit. I see that that contract was signed on the 10th of March 2015.
15, yes.
That chairperson you found on page 69 of Dr. Nteta's affidavit, paragraph 6.16.
Yes.
Do you see that, Ms. Nteta, Dr. Nteta?
Yes, paragraph 16, yes.
Yeah,
It was
6
signed
months.
on the 10th of March 2015.
That's right. But
So my interactions would have been close to that.
would have been posed that. But would you please, just before we go into the details of your interaction with them, would you please give us the background to the conclusion of the Braakfontein contract? In a nutshell, how did that contract come about? What role you played in the build-up to the conclusion?
So that contract came about from my perspective, in between June 2012 and December 2012, where I was requested by my then manager, Johan Bester, to engage on the supply of coal from Tegeta. And from that point, there were several interactions with various people from the organization, from the CEO to the general manager, etc. And that culminated in the conclusion of an agreement in March 2015, where we had various negotiations. The final negotiations was with my then manager, Johan Bester, to then conclude the coal supply agreement then.
Now, on page 65 of your affidavit, and I'm always referring to the black numbers on the top left-hand corner, page 65, paragraph 6.3, it reads there that during 2013, I, together with representatives from inter alia, the technical, environmental, and coal operations departments within PED, which is Primary Energy Division, is that correct?
Yes, it's correct.
Yeah. And the Eskom legal department engaged primarily with Mr. Ravindra Nath and Mr. Satish Mudalia from Tegeta Exploration. During initial engagement that Eskom had with Tegeta, they proposed two resources to supply coal from, namely Vierfontein and Braakfontein mine. Is this interaction, which you referred to during 2013, should in fact be dated June 2012 and onwards, from June 2012 onwards?
In terms of that particular date, why I'm saying from June 2012, it wasn't exactly in June 2012. I joined Eskom in June 2012.
Yes.
I cannot recall the exact date when Mr. Bester requested that I engage with the supplier. There were several engagements that we had. So I cannot tell you the exact date, but I do believe that there are some emails with regards to that we might get closer to the date.
Yeah. Okay, but is it correct that these engagements would have been based on an unsolicited, if I may use that word, which I see from your affidavit, an unsolicited approach is made by Tegeta.
Yes, those engagements should have been from an unsolicited approach made by
With
Tegeta.
Tegeta. So no,
Yes.
this was not an
If I can-
engagement. Carry on.
If I can just indicate, before they were Tegeta, I believe they were called, I think it was Idwala, but yes, in terms of the gentleman that we engaged with from the organization.
It was the same Mr. Ravindranath,
Yes, and Mr. Satish.
Mr.
Mudle.
Satish. So there was no procurement process necessarily followed here.
In terms of a tender that went out, no.
No.
But in terms of a tender, no.
At the time of your engagement at that stage, were you aware that there had been no tender that had been advertised or that had gone out?
Yes, so at the time of my engagement, yes, I was aware that there was no tender that had been issued. In terms of our engagement within Eskom at the time, we engaged with suppliers based on unsolicited offers. So we would get suppliers coming through to us to indicate that they have a potential to supply us with coal, and that is how we would engage them.
When you engage them after they've made that approach to you, unsolicited proposal, would your engagement with them be on the basis that you are just exploring exactly what they have in mind, but in due course a tender would be issued, or was it understood that if it's an unsolicited proposal, there would be no tender issued? You would discuss with them, and if you reach agreement, you conclude an agreement with them. What was your understanding and experience of how Eskom was dealing with such proposals?
My understanding and experience was that we would engage with suppliers to the point of conclusion into a coal supply agreement where they would supply us. At that point, we did not go out on tender, and we would conclude agreements with suppliers based on unsolicited offers.
That was your experience and that was your understanding?
Yes.
And it had happened with a number of unsolicited proposals made by different suppliers in the past?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Or maybe before we move on, you may not have been a procurement person, but I guess being at senior management level, one should expect that you would know. Did you have any understanding as to what Eskom's justification was for not going out on tender in such cases?
So the justification that Eskom had with regards to the procurement of coal was based on a medium-term mandate that was entered into in 2008 that said that we could then engage with suppliers in order to secure coal. The reason, the rationale and the justification was that in terms of getting coal, the main mandate was to secure it because of the lack of availability of this coal, particularly the volumes that Eskom was looking for, as well as the quality. So it was within the medium-term mandate, and what we were requested to do periodically is to then provide the board tender committee with feedback in terms of how we are faring against this mandate that we had.
You know, I can imagine that if supplier A approaches Eskom and says, I have a mine from which I can supply you with coal, I can imagine that obviously that coal, that is their mine, and that's their coal. If there is nobody else who can supply you with coal, there might not be any issues about not going out on tender. But I leave that aside for the time being. But I can imagine that if somebody approaches you on the basis of an unsolicited proposal and seeks to conclude a coal agreement with you as Eskom, and you do have a need for coal, you do want people who can supply you with coal, there is no reason why, as Eskom, you can't go out on tender. Let somebody else who might be able to tender or put in a bid, also put in a bid, and this one can put in a bid as well. And then you might either take both if your need is great, or take the one that gives you the best offer. Are you able to say something on this thinking that I'm having? Because you as senior manager, you might have knowledge of the dynamics at Eskom that I might not know. But I'm just saying my immediate reaction is it doesn't look like there would be justification not to go out on tender, because what if there is somebody else who can offer you coal at even a better price that you are not aware of and who has not put in an unsolicited proposal? Do you want to say something on that?
So, yes, I can say something. So the 2008 medium-term mandate was a result of I want to call it an insatiable appetite that Eskom has for coal, and having to look to secure it. So at the time, the thinking was that we should look at all mechanisms that are available to secure coal, and which is why looking in terms of the speed in which we also secure coal, which is why they had the mandate, which was open for a large volume. And it was a mandate that said, as long as you're within this particular volume that they have put in, as well as in terms of the pricing parameters, then the primary energy head would then be authorized to conclude on the agreement. So that was one of the mechanisms that was made available because of the coal requirement. The second dynamic comes in terms of the qualities that Eskom specifically looks for. And so they could be a mine that does have that particular quality or does not have that particular quality. So we also would look in terms of those various parameters when looking to secure coal.
Well, you will tell me if this is something that you wouldn't be able to deal with because of the position you held. But it seems to me that that mandate that you talk about couldn't authorize Eskom officials to do something that's unlawful. If the law required that you go out on tender, that's the law. That's what you are supposed to do. The board or somebody couldn't write a mandate that says to the executive, don't bother about the law. Don't go out to tender when in circumstances where the law says go out on tender. You understand what I mean?
Yes.
Is that something you are able to say something on, or is that something you are not able to say something on to try and make me understand why Eskom would not go on tender in these circumstances, would not go out on tender in these circumstances?
No, I would not speak on that in terms of the legalities of that or the specific mandate.
Okay, no, that's all right. Mr. Selega?
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Nteta, but the other aspect is that the BTC mandate of 2008 was not specifically relied upon for the Brakfontein contract. I see that you refer to it when you deal with the prepayment of the 659 million. So do you know for sure, or are you now surmising as to that being the reason for why the Brakfontein contract was concluded?
So the 2008 mandate looks in terms of the securing of coal of a specific volume and specific rand per ton, rand per gigajoule. And it would then, so for the Brakfontein contract, it would be within that particular mandate. Similarly, for the prepayment, for the aspect of the security of the coal, it would be within that particular mandate in terms of that. But when you then begin to talk to, and I'm going to assume that we will talk to that, you talk to the aspects of the of the payment and the finances, then that is a separate matter.
Yes,
I'm sorry, Mr. Selega and Dr. Nteta. I'm going back, I want to go back to the issue that we were dealing with a few minutes ago. Maybe I was being too soft on you to leave the issue where it was. You might not be a procurement person. You might not be qualified in procurement in terms of paper and so on, I don't know. But I would imagine that senior managers in any institution, including Eskom, would at least have some understanding of the basics of procurement, so that even if they might not have deep knowledge of procurement procedures and so on, they would know at least that before you conclude a contract with a supplier, generally you are supposed, Eskom is supposed to go out on tender unless the situation falls within certain exceptions. And if they are not sure, they would ask procurement, the procurement unit or division within Eskom, is it right that we should not go on out on tender on this? Because you would not, as a senior manager, want to involve yourself in a transaction where you might be accused of having breached procurement policies of Eskom or procurement laws that are binding on Eskom, isn't it? You would have that kind of basic knowledge, would you not?
Yes, I would have that basic knowledge.
Yes.
So when looking at the medium-term mandate, it was the practice within Eskom when looking to secure coal, we would work towards that particular mandate for coal. So I would say that at that time, probably about 80% of the transactions within the division were done within that particular mandate. It was a 10-year mandate open for that period.
Did it, that is that mandate, did it specifically say that procurement policies or procedures need not be followed in those cases where there was an unsolicited proposal?
So I have not looked at the mandate recently, but my understanding and recollection of that particular mandate, it indicated in terms of what should be done with regards to concluding coal supply agreements. So it would look in terms of those qualities and in terms of also looking at the price. And also it was quite specific about the volumes. So it indicated what should be done. I think your question to me was that, does that particular mandate then override the laws of the country?
And the policies which I assume Eskom had in relation to procurement, which a lot of state-owned entities had, which require that the entity should go out on tender, should issue tenders unless a particular case falls within certain specified circumstances, exceptions.
Correct.
Yeah, so
the history of...
Yeah,
Sorry,
continue.
So the history of the institution in terms of where primary energy comes from, it was in terms of a standalone unit that had its own managing director at the time. And that is where the policies and the procedures, etc., came from, that in terms of this particular standalone unit has its unique nuances, and therefore the procurement processes would be then dictated by, at the time, it was that particular mandate. But I am hesitant to get into the details because I would like to rather allow those who know better to talk about the history of that particular mandate, where it comes from, etc.
No, that's
So
fine.
the primary energy division did
Yes.
do its procurement in a particular way.
No, that's fine. But obviously, what you are able to do is talk about what your own understanding was, which may or may not be in line with what they will say was the position. But you certainly had your own understanding of what was supposed to be done and what was not supposed to be done. Is that right?
Correct.
But your own understanding, you are saying, was that with regard to unsolicited proposals, there was, to your knowledge, no need or requirement to go out on competitive tender. Is that right? That was your understanding?
Yes.
Yes.
That was my understanding, and that was the practice at the time.
And that was the practice at the time. It's in line with your understanding of the mandates that you have talked about.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Mr. Silega.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Nteta, well, the mandate is not attached to your affidavit. I know that you've referred to it elsewhere in your affidavit, but it's not attached. I have had the opportunity to see that mandate, and the question which the chairperson is asking, whether the mandate allowed a deviation from a procurement process, that mandate you would have seen, in fact, it doesn't have the deviation from a procurement process. The mandate contemplated the conclusion of medium-term contracts. You would recall that.
Yes.
Yes. And the mandate did not envisage unsolicited offers. So you had to determine as Eskom that you needed coal, and then you could invoke that mandate.
Yes.
There is a paragraph of particular interest in your affidavit, which is on page, it starts on page 64.
Mr. Selega, before you proceed, can arrangements be made for me to see that mandate and for Dr. Nteta to have access to it, because I think we probably won't finish with her evidence today.
Yes.
If we continue tomorrow, she would be able to refresh her memory on what it says and maybe answer some questions tomorrow.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed, Chairperson. Dr. Nteta, I was then referring to page 64, that paragraph on 5.2, paragraph 5.2 of your affidavit. You talk about the reasons why you left Eskom in that paragraph. You give a primary reason, and you give what you say are secondary reasons. Are you on that page, 64, paragraph 5.2?
Yes, sir.
You are
Yes,
there?
I now am.
Yes. So the primary reason you said it was for you to study, to pursue your studies. You see that?
Yes.
And then at a secondary level, you give quite an extensive explanation there, which the essence of which is that you were essentially moving away from pressure being brought to bear on you by the executives to do certain things. Speak to me.
Yes, so my affidavit indicates that my primary reason for leaving Eskom, yes, is to pursue my studies. The secondary reason was that the area that I was within procurement, which is the primary energy division within fuel sourcing, there was a lot of interest in terms of the transactions that were in that area from my superiors up until board level. And at the time, there had been a new board that was entering within Eskom. And what I noted in terms of the new board that came in, there still seemed to be the same interest in terms of coal transactions. And I just felt that I did not want to partake in it.
So the interest you are referring to, are you able to explain to the chairperson what you mean by that?
So with regards to interest in terms of coal transactions, throughout my tenure at Eskom, I would be asked about specific transactions as to how far we are within negotiations, how far we are within concluding. We from the fuel sourcing department are required to put together documents that go to the board tender committee. So I would be asked questions in terms of the various transactions at different times. And in my opinion, I just felt that one, my level within the organization, I should not be asked those questions. There are people who are more senior to me who should be asked those questions. And secondly, that in terms of my level, I do the transactions. And so I did not want to continue to have that kind of pressure. I was hopeful with the entering board that it would be different, and it was not.
Yeah. Now, are you able to tell the chairperson whether or not in the conclusion of the Bradfontein contract, did you have the same experience of pressure being brought to bear on you or interest being shown in this contract?
Yes, I did.
So you did have the same experience?
I had, yes, I did. There was questions I was being asked to report in to my immediate manager in terms of where the transaction was. I had to report in. The last negotiations that we had, my immediate manager joined into those particular negotiations. That was the last and final negotiation before the conclusion.
I imagine that your immediate supervisor or manager wouldn't be one of the people that you were concerned about in terms of asking you questions about transactions that you were doing, because obviously your immediate manager or supervisor is entitled to ask you to see what progress you are making, and maybe if he or she thinks the progress is slow, to push you to try and conclude the transaction as soon as possible. You accept that?
I do.
Yeah. So I suspect that the people, the pressure that you are talking about, which you seem to have found unacceptable, would come from other people. You are not talking about your immediate manager. You are talking about pressure that was directed at you, or questions that were being put to you, or inquiries by other people. Is that correct?
Correct. So with regards to the conclusion of the particular transaction with Brackfontein, yes, I would get questions from my immediate manager, and the frequency of the feedback that I had to give was weekly. I also would have to provide that same feedback to my manager's immediate manager in terms of the progress in terms of that particular transaction. We as a department, primary energy department, were also called in to a meeting, and it was only our department by our chairperson who spoke in general about how we are interacting with our suppliers, which I also felt was inappropriate.
And
I'm providing you with the examples.
when you refer to your chairperson, now you're talking about the chairperson of the board of Eskom at the time?
Yes,
Who would that have been at the time?
Mr. Tsotsi.
Mr. Tsotsi. Okay. So let me go back to getting more clarification. The people who were putting pressure that you found unacceptable on you, would some of them have been members of the board of Eskom?
So the member of, for this particular transaction for Brackfontein, is that the question, sir?
No, I'm still at a general level. You said the secondary reason why you left Eskom was because of pressure that was being brought upon you in regard to various transactions. So I'm talking at a general level at this stage.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. At a general level, on coal transactions, the main, in terms of the chairman of the board, I gave the example of them calling us in and discussing in terms of our, how we engaged in terms of the suppliers, and that should be at board level. Yes. So, it would mainly be at that level, but they'd also be within the executives.
The pressure would also come from within the executives other than your immediate manager?
Other than my immediate manager, yes.
Yes. Obviously, you regarded this pressure as not legitimate, is that right?
I regarded the pressure as that it is not required and
Yeah.
it is not necessary.
Yes.
Why I say so is that whether the medium-term mandate is right or wrong, we have a process that we follow. And I provide the feedback to my immediate boss. He, as you've indicated, if he felt I was working too slow, he would let me know, etc. But I just felt that if I have to give feedback every week on the transactions, and we deal with quite a few transactions, then I'm providing more, the work that I'm doing is providing more feedback than actually attending to the transactions. And I felt that was inappropriate.
Yes, Mr. Slager.
Thank you, Chairperson. Dr. Nteta, your immediate boss was Mr. Johan Bester.
Correct.
Is that correct? So providing feedback to him would be in order. Then you have mentioned the executives who would put pressure on you. Do you mind telling the chairperson the ones that come to your mind in this regard?
So, for example, Mr. Johan Bester reported to the Senior General Manager for Primary Energy. And I would give feedback to that Senior General Manager for Primary Energy. And I felt that is not required because I do have an immediate boss, and should he require information, he should receive it from there.
Who was the Senior GM Primary Energy at the time? 2012, 2013?
It was Mr. Mboweni.
I have seen the affidavit of Mr. Bester. When talking specifically about the Braamfontein contract, he details the time period taken prior to this contract being concluded on the 10th of March. So, as you quite correctly say, the engagement with Tegeta or the approach by Tegeta dates back to 2012. 2012,
Correct.
thank you, 2012, 2013, 2014, that's 3 years. And only in March 2015 was the contract concluded. He says, sorry, just repeat your answer.
I said correct.
Correct, thank you. He says then, during that time, even though you were reporting to him, he observed that you were being requested by persons like Mr. Mboweni, Mr. Mabelani, and Mr. Machela Koko to report directly to them. What's your comment on that?
Yes, so as I indicated, the weekly report that I had to write was to Mr. Mboweni,
Yes.
and at his request, and I would then copy Mr. Bester because I wanted him to know that I'm doing these reports, and I also informed Mr. Bester that I'd been requested to provide weekly feedback in terms of the transaction, the progress on the transaction.
Yeah, but he specifically says he had concerns that you had to be asked to report directly to Mr. Koko in regard to this Braamfontein negotiations. Your comment?
I didn't report directly to Mr. Koko with regards to the Braamfontein negotiations. I think what Mr. Bester, however, I have not seen his affidavit. I think what he's referring to is that at the negotiations that we had with Braamfontein, I did receive a call from Mr. Koko where he asked me where Mr. Bester was. And I went to Mr. Bester and told him that Mr. Koko is looking for him during those when we're in those negotiations.
So he testified in the first phase of the commission. I'll provide you with his affidavit, but there's a passage in his affidavit where he says, I always knew that there was interest in the Tegeta-Bradfontein contract from higher up. So that seems to resonate with what you've said earlier. Even since 2012. But significant pressure and focus came from the start of 2015. Bradfontein by then had its water use license, and we had run out of legal excuses to keep betting them away. From the beginning of 2015, we had to provide Mr. Machela Koko with weekly progress reports. Also, I suspected that Mr. Koko was engaging Ms. Ayanda Nteta directly, although she reported to me. He never directly put pressure on me, but he did on her. Your comment on that?
So with regards to that, I do not know where my reports went, my weekly reports went to. So Mr. Bester would be better, he would be better able to advise as to where those particular reports went to. I know that I sent my reports to him and to to the senior general manager, which is Johan's boss. Where they would go further, I don't know.
But can you say in regard to putting pressure, whether you experienced that pressure was being brought to bear on you by Mr. Machela Koko?
Not with regards to that particular transaction.
Okay. Mr. Bester continues, and as I said, I'll provide you with his affidavit. In another paragraph, he says, I realized later that Mr. Koko and his handlers had two games running, each with their own timelines. The primary one was to get rid of Finance Director Ms. Tsulufelo Molefe and Group Capital Executive Mr. Den Marukani. In hindsight, it makes sense why we came under such pressure from Mr. Koko and Mr. Mboweni, as those pulling the strings needed to effect the suspension of the four executives, including Mr. Koko, as a ruse. In brackets, he puts as a ruse against the name of Mr. Koko. And the Bradfontein contract was taking longer than they had anticipated, and I guess they were worried that without Mr. Koko, they would not be able to apply any leverage over PED, which is primary energy. It is well documented that the contract was signed on 10 March 2015 and that Mr. Koko was suspended on 11 March 2015, the next day after the contract was signed. But few have joined the dots. So, do you understand the message is conveying? So from 2015, he says, pressure was brought to bear to have this Bradfontein contract concluded as soon as possible. Because now, when he reflects back, he can see that, okay, those who were putting pressure, they would have realized that without Mr. Koko, the contract may not be concluded. You follow the reasoning?
Yes, I do.
Do you have any comment on that?
My comment is that, as I indicated to you, the final negotiation that we had was when Mr. Bester joined me in the negotiation, and that was final. At the time, I just thought he felt I was taking too long, and that's why joined because he wanted to conclude the agreement. So he, and I will thank him for that, and Mr. Mboweni would have tried to shield me from the pressure that they were receiving. So they would ask me to do those weekly reports, of which I did to them. As I indicated to you, I don't know where they went, where those reports went to after that.
I see.
So I understand his reasoning.
But you say that he would have tried to shield you from the pressure.
I will assume so. As my direct manager, he would try and do that.
Just that one
So
more.
he is,
Go ahead.
sorry?
Just go ahead. You may proceed.
No, I said I will assume that he would have done that. So your statements that you've read to me say that primary energy was getting pressure from outside of primary energy. The pressure that I was feeling and received was from within primary energy, from Mr. Bester as well as Mr. Mboweni, who are within. So they would have received it elsewhere and then filtered it and then asked me to do those weekly reports.
Yeah, but we were also going down that line because we thought you could also tell the chairperson more about what you say in that paragraph 5.2 as your secondary reason for leaving, that you experience pressure from the executives and the board members. So we're seeking to have you say more to the chairperson on that.
Yes, so the chairperson had asked me to talk about it in general, of which I did. So the events leading to the conclusion of the Braakfontein contract, as I've indicated, was the having to provide constant feedback. Other events that happened was that primary energy as a whole was called into a meeting by the Eskom chairperson. I thought that was unprecedented. So those are the kind of pressures that I felt that as we deal with the coal transactions are unnecessary.
Yeah. Let me read just the last passage from Mr. Johan Bester's affidavit. He says the medium mandate had worked well until then. And I suppose he's talking about the 2008 mandate for medium-term contracts.
Yes.
It had worked well until then. And in fact, I still believe that even the Braakfontein contract was valid and properly negotiated, and although entered into under pressure, did not compromise Eskom. Eskom was compromised when Mr. Koko suspended those trying to implement the conditions of the contract. The system wasn't broken. People like Mr. Koko tried to compromise the system that was in place, and people like Mr. Mboweni appeared to be powerless to push back. Interestingly, in this instance, Mr. Mboweni signed. He was probably told to do so to ensure that the validity of the contract couldn't be questioned. You may comment, if you have any comment, in regard to the first part which I read about the system not being broken, but that Mr. Machela Koko tried to compromise the system that was in place. Whether you have any knowledge of this? And people being suspended?
I will agree with Mr. Bester in terms of the medium-term mandate, because I do believe that it served Eskom well. And that particular agreement fell within that medium-term mandate. With regards to the suspension of executives, etc., I will not comment because I really did not follow that in detail. So I would rather not comment on it.
I see. Thank you. So the contract is concluded, the Braakfontein contract concluded on the 10th of March, 2015. You say you would have had interactions with the Gupta. In particular here, you specifically mentioned Mr. Tony Gupta after the conclusion of that contract.
Yes.
Now, please relate to the chairperson how those interactions came about, how many were they, and what did they entail?
Okay. So the interactions, and why I say it was after the conclusion of the agreement, because the first interaction, I was actually requested by Mr. Nath, Ravindra Nath, who is the CEO of the organization. We would engage...
CEO of which organization?
Of Tegeta.
Yeah.
Sorry. He had requested that I meet with him to discuss, at the time we were discussing the volumes, because the agreement that was put in place had a ramp up of the volumes based on the mine being able to produce the coal. So at the time we were discussing in terms of that particular ramp up of the agreement. So he requested a meeting with myself.
Hang on, Dr. Nteta, hang on.
Yes.
Your interactions with Mr. Tony Gupta, did they happen after the conclusion of the Braakfontein contract or not?
Yes,
or some
they did.
happened before and others after?
It was after.
They happened after the conclusion of the
Yes.
Braakfontein contract?
Yes, they happened in the execution of the contract.
In the execution of the
After.
contract? Yes, in that event, Mr. Slega, we need to cover the evidence up to the conclusion of the contract. I was seeing that in her affidavit, it appears that up to paragraph 6.16, which is at page 69.
Yes, Chair.
Unless I've missed something, I seem to not to have seen where before that paragraph she talks about the signing of that contract. I see that at 6.16 she says the CSA was signed by Mr. Mboweni on 10 March 2015. Is that the Braakfontein one?
That is 6.16.
If I've missed something, maybe I have, but I would like the evidence of the discussions and negotiations and the happenings that preceded the conclusion of the contract to be covered, so that we know this is how the contract got to be concluded. And then if we then deal with the execution of the contract and what happened in connection with the execution of the contract, we can then deal with that. Then we know that it's after the conclusion of the contract.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Nteta, you follow?
I follow.
Yes.
I am concerned because I thought we were dealing with the prepayment, but I will respond to the questions to the best of my memory.
Yes, there is reference to we've had some discussion about the conclusion of the Braakfontein contract. And it seems to me to be left hanging. But both the evidence leader and yourself, Dr. Nteta, you would know more about the background to the affidavit. Both of you can alert me to something that I might have missed. But for the story and the evidence to be easy to follow, it's much better if we say, this is what happened, the contract was concluded, and then where the prepayment fits in, then obviously that can be dealt with where it should be dealt with. Mr. Selega, you will tell me if there's something I've missed.
No, Chair. I think you haven't missed anything, Chair, but you are correct that we haven't given the chairperson the details as set out in Dr. Nteta's affidavit. in regard to the Braakfontein contract. So Dr. Nteta, maybe we could go into the details insofar as you have set them out in your affidavit, because they are there in your affidavit. So, and that starts on page 65 of your affidavit. Just by way of a guidance, under paragraph 6. Indeed, I had certain questions to ask you in regard to the progress and exchanges made during the negotiation stages. So what we have established from you is that the negotiations or the approach by Tegeta would have taken place back in June 2012. So Tegeta would have come to Eskom and said, we would like to offer coal to Eskom. Correct? Supply coal to Eskom.
Yes. So the engagements with Tegeta preceded myself. They came to Eskom and they engaged with, and please excuse me, I think there are emails to the regard. They dealt with various seniors within Eskom prior to my engagement. I just cannot recall the exact date.
So prior to you being employed at Eskom?
Yes.
In fact, Tegeta had already approached Eskom to supply coal to Eskom.
Yes.
When you came when you became employed at Eskom in June 2012, you became engaged in interactions or negotiations that were already ongoing.
So yes, so prior to my employ at Eskom, Tegeta had been involved with various people. Apologies that I just cannot get all the specific names.
Yeah.
I joined Eskom late, not as in terms of the day that I joined, then I was asked to look at Tegeta. I joined Eskom, and I'm going to estimate perhaps 6 to 10 months after I had joined Eskom, Mr. Bester then asked me to lead the negotiations with regards to this particular transaction.
I see. That engagement is what you deal with in paragraph 6.3 of your affidavit on page 65. You say
Yes.
during 2013.
Yes.
So during 2013, I, together with representatives from inter alia, the Technical, Environmental and Coal Operations Department within PED and the Eskom Legal Department, engaged primarily with Mr. Ayanda Nteta. So we've read that passage. And they were proposing to offer Eskom coal from 2 mines, Vierfontein and Braakfontein.
Yes.
Vierfontein did not succeed, only Braakfontein remained on the table as of that date. Just speak to the mic.
So at my first engagements with the supplier, they had indicated they had 2 offers. The Vierfontein, why we did not progress with that, because in terms of one of the requirements for the conclusion of an agreement is that the source has a water use license. So if my memory serves me correctly, the Vierfontein was further back in terms of that application for a water use license. And that is why we did not continue with this, because the Braakfontein source was further along in terms of their application. There could have been other environmental issues that the environmental team may have brought up, which I cannot recall at this time.
Yes, you in fact do refer to environmental issues in regard to Vierfontein in the last sentence of your paragraph 6.3, but that's on page 66.
Okay, yes.
Well, talking of the water use license, that's P66, Chairperson, the top paragraph. Talking of the water use license, in 2012 and 2013, Datta also did not have a license in regard, water use license, in regard to the Brakfontein mine.
Correct.
Could you have concluded a contract with them at that stage?
No. So in terms of what we would do in terms of unsolicited offers, we would engage with various suppliers and we would advise them in terms of the requirements for the conclusion of an agreement. So because particularly when it's new sources, there are a lot of things that would happen, and the negotiations generally take about 18 to 24 months, unfortunately. And we recognize that at that time, a water use license would take about 18 to 24 months. So we would engage with various suppliers on aspects in terms of their coal, etc. There's also options in terms of the environmental issues. If they do a box cut and we get coal, in terms of from the box cut, there are certain requirements that would not be as onerous as a full-blown mining. So we would engage with suppliers. At some point, and there is a memo, which I would ask the employees at Eskom to find, where the senior general manager then indicated that from this point onwards, that we should ensure that we do actually we conclude only agreements with them. So to answer in a long-winded way, we would engage suppliers, even if they didn't have a water use license, but we would not conclude an agreement.
Yes. And that engagement with a supplier who doesn't have a water use license, I mean, what would it entail?
So the engagement would be looking in terms of the qualities that they have, would look in terms of the pricing that they have to offer. We would also look in terms of the potential legal agreement that we would look at. So there'd be quite a few engagements, different aspects. Whilst we are also, whilst we're reminding them that they need to, we also ask for progress in terms of how far they are in terms of their water use license and remind them that they would need to have one.
You know,
previously we would actually conclude agreements without a water use license.
Yes. When you talk about negotiations would take 18 to 20 months, I am reminded of the tender process that was ongoing in April 2016, where, and that was in respect of the Arnott power station, supply to Arnott power station.
Yes.
In April, when the question was asked, how long is that process going to take? You say you responded to the BTC members on a teleconference that it will be completed in September 2016.
Correct.
Which is much less than 6 months.
Correct.
So how do we understand, how should we understand your explanations?
So one of the things that I'd tried to do when I was acting general manager for fuel sourcing was, one, to institute issuing out of tenders and to then have, to try and get a more robust process in terms of the tendering process and requirements and to try and streamline it so that it takes a much shorter time. And that is why we were able then to I was able then to say we anticipated to be concluded in terms of September.
So are you saying that explanation would apply in 2011, that a shorter time period.
No, so that explanation would not have applied in 2011 because the process at the time was looking, one, in terms of what the requirements were different. And so two, it was looking in terms of an unsolicited offer where the suppliers is then indicated that we need X, Y, Z. The practice of what would happen is that we would indicate to the supplier that we need X, Y, and Z. The supplier would then go away and we would not actually give them any timeline that come back to us within 30 days or something like that. We would actually just wait for the suppliers to come back, and some of them took 2 to 3 months, and then they would come back once they're able to rectify an element that we'd ask them to rectify. So the process in going out on the tender, we really tried to streamline it and try and do it more efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, I would have thought where you are approached by one supplier, unsolicited, they have all the information, that would be a more expedited process than when you go through a tender process.
It could be if the supplier then came back timelessly. But the general practice is that the suppliers, some suppliers would come back in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, other suppliers would come back in 3 months. And we would leave it open for them to come back when they are ready.
Yeah.
Whereas in a tender, you have to submit everything by a certain time. And we were quite stringent in terms of what are the requirements that we want them to put in and what we were evaluating to try and make it more efficient.
Mr. Slater, we are at 4 o'clock now. Sometimes we will work until late, but it doesn't help to work until late if later in the week we are going to have days that might not be used. So what is the position with regard to other witnesses tomorrow and beyond?
Chair, I believe Mr. Kuku is coming tomorrow.
Okay.
He will take us the whole day.
Yes. Have 3 notices in regard to his evidence been sorted out?
Not yet, Chair.
Well, if 3 notices have not been sorted out, how are we going to proceed with his evidence?
Yes, Chair. I intended speaking with the chairperson about it so that I could also communicate.
Well, let's talk about it when they are here tomorrow, because they are affected.
Yes, Chair.
And after that, the next witness and beyond, what is the position?
On Wednesday, we had scheduled Mr. Anoj Singh.
Mr.?
Anoj Singh.
Yes.
I had a meeting with his attorney and counsel, I think last week Friday, Chair.
Mm-hmm.
There is a default of filing an affidavit on his part.
Mm-hmm.
They want to regularize that.
They want?
They want to regularize that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know...
Why have they not filed it up to now? As I understand, there was a 10-6 directive.
Absolutely, Chair. I have written to them a letter, Chair.
Yeah.
Setting out the position. And,
and I guess with regard to him, there are no 3-3 issues. There are no Rule 3-3 issues with regard to him, because I take it most of the time he is implicated and he is responding to that.
Yes,
or what is the position?
We haven't seen his affidavit, Chair.
Yes, I mean from
yes.
your side, you are not able to say there are problems with 3-3 notices because there's nothing you were supposed to serve on other people.
Correct.
So he has been
So summoned
he has been served with a summons
Yes.
for Wednesday.
for Wednesday.
Therefore, he should be here. And when he's here, he's going to need to explain why he didn't comply with the 10-6 directive.
I have indicated that much to his
Yeah.
legal
So
representative.
he must be here, and he'll need to explain that.
Yes.
So that seems to be fine with regard to him.
Yes.
And from what I remember, the deadline by when you are supposed to finish an affidavit in terms of the 10-6 directive has long passed.
That was the 4th of September, Chair.
So it's completely unacceptable. Well, he'll need to take the stand here and explain. So that's fine for Wednesday.
Yes.
And how he could be quite long in terms of his evidence.
Chairperson, the way I've planned them is to be one day, a full one day with them.
Yes, but would he, or by the way, he would cover Eskom only,
Yes.
and he would not cover Transnet. He would
No.
have to come back for
Yeah,
Transnet.
that's
But
right.
your estimate is that one day would be enough for him?
It should be enough, Chair.
Yeah, okay, all right. And then Friday,
Then Thursday, before Friday.
or Thursday, yeah.
Yes. Thursday, then, we have Ms. Musilo and Bianca Goodson. We have also scheduled Ms. Matsietsi Mkolo.
Yeah,
And then Friday is Mr. Brown Molefe.
yeah, okay. And with regard to Mr. Brian Molefe, how much time have you considered to be adequate? Is it a one day also with him?
One day, but shorter than a full day.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
shorter than a full day.
okay. Now, persons who implicated Mr. Anuj Singh and Mr. Brian Molefe, have they been given whatever affidavits? I know you said Mr. Anuj Singh has not filed an affidavit, but I know that Mr. Brian Molefe did file affidavits, I think. Have they been given to the witnesses who implicated them, and have those witnesses commented on their version?
Mr. Brian Molefe's affidavit, which I can't recall offhand. I know we have exchanged the affidavit of Mr. Koko, certainly. And we would have also exchanged the written submission of Mr. Anod Singh at the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee with the witnesses. In regard to Mr. Brown Molefe, I can't recall offhand. And I know that he doesn't implicate people as such.
Yeah, he
But-
might not implicate them, but they might have something to say about his version.
Insofar as he mentions them, yes. I
Yeah.
think I've exchanged his affidavit with Ms. Suzanne Daniels. Chair.
Yeah, you must just check, because
Yeah.
the best scenario is where you have got all the information when the
Yes.
witness takes the stand.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, well, in that event, I think we should continue
Finish
at
at
least
5.
with this witness until 5.
Five, okay.
And then we take it from there.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, all right. Dr. Nteta, we're going to continue until 5 o'clock. Is that all right with you?
That is fine, sir.
Okay, all right. Mr. Silega?
Thank you, Chairperson. So, Dr. Nteta, you were explaining the time period it takes to negotiate this agreement. And I was saying to you that it seems to me that if a supplier comes to you unsolicited, the process might be expeditious as opposed to when you follow a tender process, but you have given your explanation. Can I ask you this? Because you seem to have given two different answers. On the one hand, when I ask you, whether could you conclude an agreement with Datta in respect of Braamfontein if they didn't have a water use license, you said no. But then you gave an explanation. Subsequently, you said in the past you did conclude agreements with suppliers who didn't have a water use license. So which answer applies?
So when I said we, I said Eskom has concluded agreements with suppliers without a water use license. There was a memo or a directive that was sent through by the senior general manager at the time that indicated that we must ensure that a supplier has a water use license. And that was in the time of the engagements with Braamfontein. So I repeat that for Braamfontein, we could not have concluded the co-supply agreement unless they had a valid water use license.
Okay.
They were able to produce it.
Okay, I understand. So at the time of the Braamfontein negotiations, a new dispensation was introduced.
Yes, yes, a new dispensation was introduced. However, yes.
Okay. So in that dispensation, you were precluded from concluding a co-supply with a supplier who didn't have a water use license.
Who wasn't able to produce one, yes.
Yes. Because
Yeah. Yes?
Yeah. Because without a water use license, they're precluded from mining. They can't mine.
I don't want to answer that because that's on the environmental side, because I think they can mine on a box cut, but I'm really not an expert to the extent of that, yeah.
In those cases where in the past Eskom did conclude co-supply agreements with suppliers who didn't have a water use license, do you know whether it would have been a condition of the agreement that they obtain such a license, or, as you understand it, the position was that that would not be a condition? To say they must obtain the water use license within a certain period, and if they didn't get it, then the agreement would fall away.
That is my understanding, but I'm not confident on that understanding because I personally did not do it.
Okay.
But I would make an assumption that it would be a condition that we must have it within a certain period.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Chair. So you personally have no experience concluding a contract with a supplier who didn't have a water use license?
Not that I'm aware of.
You personally. Okay, now let's go through this period of negotiations in respect of the Braamfontein. I'm on page 66 of your affidavit. 66.
Yes.
Now, there is an aspect I want to raise with you during this negotiation period. Because in November 2014, you say you send an email to Datta, and that email attached the supply agreement.
Yes.
Now, maybe you can explain, because at this stage of the negotiations, Datta hasn't obtained a water use license, and you have a memorandum that you have referred to, which introduces a new dispensation that you can't conclude a contract with a supplier who doesn't have a water use license. So can you explain to the chairperson, why did you provide them with a coal supply agreement at a time when you are precluded from concluding a contract with them?
So the practice at Eskom is that particularly for suppliers that have not engaged with primary energy and have not seen our coal supply agreement, would be to send them a copy of the coal supply agreement so that they have an opportunity to view it, provide comment on it, and if there are issues that they believe would be a concern, they're able to raise it, and then it also becomes part of the negotiation process. Because the process in terms of concluding the supply agreements, as I indicated, can sometimes take 18 months, 12 to 18 months, we try and do as much as possible in parallel. So the email that I would have sent to them would have been a copy of a draft coal supply agreement. I stand to be corrected, but I do believe in my email, I do indicate to them that it does not, you have nice legal words, but it does not constitute an agreement. And so I did put a disclaimer in that email, but it was an opportunity for them to have a look at that agreement. We do that with suppliers that do not, have not engaged and do not know our terms and conditions, because our supply agreements are about 65 pages.
Yes.
Eskom supply agreements are 65 pages.
Mr. Selega,
Yes.
the events leading to the signing of the agreement that Dr. Nteta deals with in her affidavit, you would know how important they are
Yes, Chair.
to be covered by way of oral evidence. If there is no particular significance to them, things like Mr. Bester took over the chairing of a certain meeting and so on, we can move on.
Yes.
But if they have a particular significance which emerges later, then that's fine. So I know that I said we hadn't covered the conclusion of the Brankfontein contract, but you would understand the significance of some of these things better. If there is no significance, they were just put in there just to indicate what happened before the conclusion of the contract, then you don't need to dwell on them.
Okay, Chair. Thank you. I understand fully what the chairperson is conveying to me. Dr. Nteta, on this very point I'm at, the email that you send, did you send it on your own accord, or were you told to send this email?
I would have sent it on my own accord so that they can be aware of the agreement, because I've done that before for new suppliers, and we do that for new suppliers.
I see. You also talk about tests that were conducted in respect of the coal that was to be supplied by Datta. Can you recall what the test results were? Because I don't see it in your affidavit.
I think there were several tests that were done with several reports, but the members of the technical team would be better placed to talk to those tests, because that would be their responsibility. Okay. So I think there was a Q scan done. There were several tests.
Yes. Then the water use license was only granted in December 2014, and Mr. Johan Bester said thereafter there was pressure brought to bear, at least on him. He thinks there was also pressure on you, but you have explained yourself. Then in 2015, talking of 2015, and I'm now on page 68 of your affidavit, there's a request you refer to for Datta to be registered as a vendor.
Yes.
But even at that stage, Datta hasn't signed the agreement with Eskom. You recall that?
Yes.
Because now things seems to move fairly fast after they've obtained the water license. In fact, it took only less than 3 months for that agreement to be concluded on the 10th of March, 2015. Before I go into that, can you explain, if you know, what was the delay from 2012 to March 2015? For 3 years.
I can only talk to the period that I was engaged with them. And I would say really the major delay, which is an issue when we have unsolicited, is that we would discuss certain elements with the particular supplier, and then they would then go away and attend to those issues. They would then come back to us when they are ready to do so. So at times, and I think there are some minutes that I attempted to do, you would see that there's a month or two delay where the supplier is attending to something or other. And that is the main reason why it takes long, because the suppliers normally take a while to come back to us.
Yeah. And I'm grappling to understand Go ahead.
So, and I'm talking to the time when I was engaged with them. Prior to that, I think they came to Eskom in 2011. I stand to be corrected. I do not know what the delay was.
Yes. Yes, no, correct. We're taking your engagement from 2012, isn't it? After June 2012.
Yeah, I'd say 2013, yes.
Yeah. And I'm grappling to understand what are these issues, because you only gave them a copy of the draft agreement in November 2014. I mean, this is where, if you like, serious engagement takes place, and they will go home and look at the draft, do comments, and so on and so forth, and then come back to you. And we can see it's a short period of space, from November 2014 to 10 March, when the agreement was signed. It's about 4 months.
Yes.
So what was the delay for 3 years?
So the delay would be a few things, as I've indicated. And if you look at some of the minutes, you might say to them, some of the delay also is from Eskom side, where we were doing a combustion test, and that takes a bit of some time. It could be that for whatever reason, they would be attending to certain issues. It could be that maybe they are not prioritizing it. I cannot answer to the reasons why they delay, but it is not, I want to say it's not uncommon, because a lot of times suppliers will come to Eskom and say, I have coal, what do you need? And then when we advise them what we need, then they will go back, and sometimes they can even take 6 months to get whatever is needed from Eskom.
Yeah, so didn't the reason have to do with the water use license or the absence thereof?
So, yeah, I was about to say that it could be that they did not prioritize this transaction because they understood from my engagement with them that, we can go as far as we can, but until you've got your water use license, we cannot conclude an agreement. So they could have decided not to prioritize it, but I don't want to speak on their behalf.
Yeah. But then also on Eskom's side, whether you would push hard enough, if you know that they don't have this license. Yes,
so in general, we would advise in terms of the suppliers. Eskom would advise the suppliers what is required. And generally, we don't always follow up with them, to say that, okay, you have not come to see us after 2 months, what is the issue?
Yes.
Because we would also be dealing with other suppliers at the same time.
Yes. But now here we see before March 2015, before the signing of the agreement, you take steps to have them registered as a vendor.
Correct.
Correct? But it doesn't end there. You do say in your affidavit that you told the vendor department or the vendor management at the vendor management department that Tegeta has been awarded a contract. That's in paragraph 614 on page 68. Now, explain that to the chairperson, because you don't have a contract with Tegeta. You're going to be placing them as a vendor on Eskom's database. But you don't only do that, you tell the management that, in fact, we have already awarded a contract to them when you have not at that stage. This is in February 2015. I wanted to suggest to you a possibility, but maybe I should let you explain to the chairperson. Why do you take the steps? Why do you do this?
So we negotiated with Tegeta in January 2014 with Mr. Bester. At the end of that, Mr. Bester sent them through offer letter. And in terms of that, that's one of the, we have in the past, and it is not correct, had coal supplied to Eskom based on that offer letter. Because it sets out the pricing, volumes, and qualities. And that then constitutes an agreement that we have with a particular supplier. So we had done that. Also, having had the discussion with Mr. Bester, he understood that from the vendor requirement side of things, it takes some time in terms of the additional requirements that the supplier has. So he had requested that I get that process going to get them registered while we are also finalizing the longer term supply agreement. So my email is incorrect. I should have said that we have sent them a letter, an offer letter, and not necessarily to say an agreement. However, we have wrongly so had coal supplied based on those offer letters.
Wrongly, you say?
Yes, it's not often,
Yes.
and it is not best practice. I agree.
Yes, okay. What I thought was going on here, and tell me if I'm incorrect. I'm looking at the context of the affidavit of Mr. Bester. He talks about pressure being brought to bear on him. I'm looking at also what you have stated is the intervention by the interest in this contract by the executives and some of the board members, and putting pressure on you, asking you every week what's going on. I thought what was happening here was a reaction to the pressure that was being brought to bear, was as a consequence of the pressure that was being brought to bear. Your comment?
So having had your affidavit, the affidavit of Mr. Bester read to me right now, and looking in terms of that period from January to March, where I was being asked to provide weekly feedback, and Mr. Bester's involvement, because prior to, let me say, December 2014, he was not involved in the transaction, but after, in 2015, he was. So having put all that together, I can understand why Mr. Bester would say that there was pressure, and why he would then be involved in, in that agreement to the extent that he is involved in that agreement because of the pressure that he was receiving and also sending it through to myself and my pressure also from his senior. So I agree with you that it could have been a consequence and he was feeling that pressure and exerting it on myself.
Chair, I think that is, from our part, sufficient in regard to the Braamfontein.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah. I could then go into Dr. Nteta's meetings with one of the Gupta brothers. That should be fairly short, Chairperson.
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay. Dr. Nteta, then
So-
the agreement is in place.
Yes.
You were relating about how the first meeting with Mr. Tony Gupta came about.
Yes.
Yes.
So I had been engaging with Mr. Nath, who is the CEO of Datta, with regards to the onboarding of his contract, looking in terms of the volumes that are available and the general aspects of his contract. He'd asked, requested from myself that for a meeting, and at the time I was quite busy, so we were trying to see the best time. And then I'd indicated to him that yes, I am going through to Sandton for some other meetings so that we could possibly meet. He then indicated to me, I said, okay, send me the address where we can meet, and that's what he did. I put in the address and I arrived. The place that I arrived was at Saxonwold. At arrival, it was it's a huge complex, and so I made the assumption at the time
Did you say
that their
Saxonwold?
offices together.
Did you say
Pardon?
the,
At Saxonwold.
Did you say the
Saxonwold,
place
yes.
where you went to was Saxonwold?
Sorry, I didn't hear the
Did
start
you
of the
say-
sentence, sir.
Did you say the place that you went to for that meeting was Saxonwold?
Yes, it was.
Okay, all right. Continue.
So on arrival, sorry, sir.
Continue.
Oh. So on arrival, I made that assumption that it is, the offices are there because it is quite a big complex. And I came in, and when I walked into the residence, I was introduced by Mr. Tony Gupta as Tony. And I then indicated to him that I'm here to see Mr. Nath for a meeting. He proceeded to ask me some questions with regards to the coal supply agreement, the mechanics of how it works, etc. And it was really in the realm of the operations department. So I indicated to him that I normally deal with the agreements up until the agreement is signed. The questions that she's asking me about the mechanics of the agreement are in the realm of the operations department, and I then indicated to him that through his CEO, he should then engage with the operations department so that he can understand how that contract goes. And I did keep asking him in terms of where Mr. Nath is. I suspect I may have irritated him because after a few asking of where Mr. Nath is, then he then said, thank you, and I left.
I mean, the address,
Did you say he said thank you and you left?
Yes, because I'd been asking him in terms of, he'd been wanting to get more details with regards to the operations of the agreement. And to the best of my knowledge, I tried to ask and answer him. But I think, as I said to him, I think I may have irritated him because my understanding I was meeting Mr. Nath. So I kept on asking, is Mr. Nath coming? Is Mr. Nath coming? Where he'd still try and ask me about how the agreement runs. So it wasn't long, and then I left without seeing Mr. Nath.
Did he ever say what was the story about Mr. Nath and the meeting? Because one would have expected that he would call him for you if he was not
Yes,
with you.
yeah. So he actually never really answered the question in terms of, each time I'd ask, he'd sort of be a bit evasive and then ask me more questions about the coal supply agreement. He just never really answered the question.
How long would you say you took having this discussion with him?
I'm going to say maybe 15, 20 minutes, I would
Yes.
guess.
Yes, okay. Mr.
Was it long?
Slager.
Thank you, Chair. The address itself would have indicated that the location is at Saxon World, isn't it? The address given to you by Mr. Nam.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes, this is in 2015. And would you have known about the Guptas at this stage in 2015?
Not really. Maybe they've been in the news, but I don't follow it greatly. So I would probably know who the Gupta is, but not intimately.
Yes. So you would have, or would you have become aware of media reports about the Guptas?
To be very honest with you, I don't fully follow in terms of what is happening in terms of the media. So it's a very difficult question for me to ask because I don't know. I might have known, like, okay, there's a almost a company, there's an organization by the name, there's a family by the name of the Guptas, but I really did not follow.
Yeah, well, just generally, the general knowledge, not the details. So really the question is, when you are introduced to him as Mr. Tony Gupta, is the name the first time you hear, or is a name that sounds familiar to you?
So the surname of Gupta is familiar to me.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, he introduced himself as Tony,
Yes.
and not with the surname. But I mean, if it's Tony Gupta, so I would understand who he is, but as I said, I don't fully follow
Yeah. Now, how did
media and things like that.
Yes. How did you make that connection?
So the connection that I made was in terms of when he's also then asking me about the Brackfontein. And I also then recall saying, well, I've seen the connection that at the time, I did not understand that they were part of Oak Bay. So I remember just thinking, okay, this transaction, the shareholders, it's Oak Bay and some other individuals. I think it was some lady, etc. So then I got an understanding that, okay, this is a shareholder. And I think he did say I'm a shareholder within Brackfontein, and I want to understand the mechanics.
Yes, but my question is, if he introduced himself to you only as Tony, how did you make the connection that he's Tony Gupta?
So he said his name is Tony.
Yes.
He may have said later on, Tony Gupta, I'm Tony Gupta, but in the interaction, he would always say Tony. So I made the deduction that Gupta must be part of the Oak Bay and then also part of the transaction. And I do believe he then said to me, I'm a shareholder in terms of the Brackfontein.
Yeah.
When you saw the address, which included Saxon World, do you remember whether that might have given you the idea that this could be the Gupta residence at the time, or is that something that didn't click with you at the time? So on getting the address and saying Saxon World, yes, I understood that it could be their address, but also understanding that that's probably because I didn't actually know where the Tegeta offices were. Yeah. So then just thinking that it could have been in that area. Mm-hmm. But as you were interacting with Tegeta, you knew the connection between Tegeta and the Guptas, or did you not know it? So my first, I'm going to call it a light bulb moment, was actually at the end of the agreement, the negotiations.
So then it then realized that, okay, this is Oak Bay, this is Oak Bay, Tegeta, Gupta, and that really was at the end. But in my initial negotiations with them, I actually did not put those two together.
But you say.
But by the time that I did meet them,
Yes.
I had then understood that.
Yes.
Because also there was media. I mean, I'm not going to say that I did not know totally. I did.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So that would have been before the conclusion of the agreement, which is 10 March 2015, that you would have had this knowledge about them.
I'm actually going to say probably at the end of it, so probably about April, May, after the agreement. So prior to that, not really. And as I said, I'm not one to be following a lot in terms of the media.
Yes.
But from March onwards, I actually want to say around about May, but I stand to be corrected.
Yeah. Well, to the extent that you knew about them, Dr. Nteta, prior to this meeting with Mr. Tony Gupta, well, it was a meeting, as you say, intended to be with Mr. Nath, but it ended up with Mr. Tony Gupta.
Yes.
Did you make a decision that this meeting will never take place, or a meeting such as this will never take place again? In other words, that you are not going to have a meeting anymore again with Mr. Tony Gupta or any of the Gupta brothers?
So when I left there at the time, I was annoyed that I had been summoned there believing that I was meeting Mr. Nath. So that was more, if I can put it, that my irritation with regards to that. And that was my sentiment at the time. I didn't engage as to whether I would meet them again or not meet them again at all. It was just more why was Mr. Nath not there?
So in paragraph 9.3 of the affidavit, page 82,
Yes.
you refer to what he talked with you about, Mr. Tony Gupta. So you say he proceeded, the third sentence, he proceeded to ask me about coal sampling processes, and predominantly coal operations processes, I beg your pardon, coal operations processes at Eskom.
Yes.
Please tell us what are these topics about? What exactly is he
So when I
raising?
say so in the discussion that I had with him, it was when I say coal operations, I'm talking about the coal supply agreement, the operations in terms of the mechanics of a coal supply agreement. So in terms of Brakfontein, how do they go about sampling? What is the process in terms of sampling? How is the coal supply agreement? What are the operations and the mechanics in terms of executing the contract?
I see. So he wants to obtain information from you on how the contract, let me put it this way, on what is entailed in the execution of the contract.
Yes.
Is that right?
What is the process and the procedures? Yes.
But these are things that a supplier is expected to know, isn't it?
So yes, what tends to happen in terms of Eskom and the engagements that I've had with coal suppliers is that you have coal suppliers where there's the operations and you'd have the executives within the organization, the CEO, the COO, and those who are running the mine per se. And it's oftentimes different from the actual shareholders. So for whatever reason, there are some suppliers, for whatever reason, the operations versus the shareholders, there's a disconnect, and the shareholders may feel that we want to know more, we want to hear it from Eskom as to how things, the mechanisms of the agreement, whether they want to verify what their executives are saying, etc.
Yes.
So the executives would know how to execute the contract, not necessarily the shareholders.
Yes. No, that's correct. But if a shareholder wants to meet with you, the shareholder is not going to trick you into you thinking that you're meeting Mr. X, and then you suddenly end up meeting the shareholder. You're going to know that I'm going to meet the shareholder.
Normally, I will know that I'm going to meet the shareholder, yes.
Yeah, I'm saying
because
if.
the shareholder would contact me.
Yes.
Or sometimes I'd meet, the CEO would say, or let me say the executive would then say, I would like you to meet with our shareholder.
Yes, so you would know.
He wants to. Sometimes,
Yes, the point is, you would know beforehand that the request is for you to meet with the shareholder.
Yes, I would be told that normally I would be told that either by the executive or by the shareholder contacting me directly.
In this case, you were not told.
No, I was told that I was meeting the CEO. The CEO requested the meeting.
Yes, and it really isn't Eskom's business as to what's happening between the executives of a supplier and its shareholders. Isn't it?
I don't want to say it's not our business per se, because we've had situations, if there's there's a disconnect between the two, it can jeopardize the potential for us to supply coal. So if there's disgruntlement, etc., it then affects us in terms of the security of coal. And one of our biggest mandates from the fuel sourcing perspective was security of supply.
Yeah, but in this case, you know nothing about the concerns of the shareholder. They haven't been raised with you beforehand. You haven't been told that, look, the shareholder has X, Y, and Z, which is of concern to him or her or them, and would you please address the shareholder on such a date at such a meeting? This meeting arranged is between you and the CEO. And
yes, so at the time I didn't know there's a disgruntled shareholder, no. But it's not uncommon that there would be a disgruntled shareholder.
Yeah, but you haven't said here that he's disgruntled. He doesn't seem to be disgruntled here. He's actually asking you information.
No. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so there's no disgruntlement. He's simply asking you information that seems to be information of more operational, at the operational level.
Correct, of his agreement, yes.
Yeah.
When I say disgruntled, I made the assumption that sometimes there are shareholders that are not happy in terms of
but just confine you to this
mechanisms.
one. Just confine
Yes,
you
sorry,
to this
apologies. No, he's not disgruntled. He's just trying to understand
Yes.
the mechanics of his agreement.
Did it not surprise you? Well, you say you were angry or upset. Did it surprise you that he was asking information at that level of operations?
It didn't surprise me that he's asking that information at that level, because I've had some shareholders ask me in terms of take me through, how to get a contract in terms of Eskom, what needs to happen. So his questions didn't surprise me because I've experienced them before. As I indicated, sometimes it's because the shareholder feels that he's not getting relevant information from his employee.
Okay, then you do relate in your affidavit a second meeting with Mr. Tony Gupta. Would you please tell the
Correct.
would you tell the chairperson about that one?
Okay. So the second meeting, I was called by by Tony.
Well, I'm sorry,
To meet with him.
Dr. Nteta. Before you
Yes.
talk about the second meeting, for the sake of completeness, tell me whether subsequent to your first meeting with him, which was meant to be a meeting with Mr. Nat, whether you connected with Mr. Nat or he connected with you, and what was his explanation for not turning up at the meeting?
So I did have quite a few engagements with Mr. Nath. So I did indicate to him that he needs to take, that I met with his shareholder, and he needs to take him through the process of the coal operations, and also that perhaps he needs to be meeting with the coal operations team just so that he can understand it.
Yes,
And,
but the
and,
first,
Mr. Nath then said, yeah, no, it appeared to me that Mr. Gupta is the one who wanted to meet, so he says no. So I got a sense that that was the intention, that he wanted to get an independent view.
okay. Were you mistaken in understanding prior to going to Saxon World, in understanding that your meeting was with Mr. Nat?
Yes, I was mistaken.
So the intention on his part, that is, Mr. Nat, was that you meet with Mr. Gupta, as you subsequently understood.
Yes.
But why wouldn't Mr. Tony Gupta have said to you, no, you are meant to meet with me, not with Mr. Nat? You kept on asking about Mr. Nat, and he never said, what are you talking about? I'm the one you are supposed to meet with. Did you ever understand why he wouldn't have said that if his own understanding too was that you were there to meet with him?
I can't speak to that. I can't speak to his understanding as to why he didn't just tell me.
But are you saying that Mr. Nat did explain why he didn't pitch up for the meeting, and he explained it on the basis that you must have misunderstood the meeting that he asked you to go to was a meeting with Mr. Tony Gupta?
Yes, so I just asked, and it appears to me that that was the intention.
Yes, but
that the intention was for me to meet with Mr. Gupta.
But is that
The intention of
because,
both parties.
is that because that's what he told you, Mr. Nat, or is that because you didn't ask him directly, why did you not turn up at the meeting, but you inferred that he was not meant to meet with you?
So I asked Mr. Nath in terms of, I said, you'd requested the particular meeting, you were not at the meeting. And he indicated that Mr. Gupta is the person who wanted to meet with me. And I said, well, he was asking me in terms of information about coal operations and things like that, which firstly is not within my area, but also it's something that I felt, you could explain to him. And then he did indicate that, he wanted to understand it and, wanting to understand that particular agreement. And so that's why I'm saying to you that there was the intention that I meet with him.
Yeah,
From
it's
both
very
those,
strange.
from the two individuals.
Yeah, it's very strange. Yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah.
It might, maybe it's not so important.
Yeah,
continue.
but Dr. Nteta, what the chairperson was trying to establish with you, and I think you gave an answer, but you didn't appreciate the question. The question is were you mistaken? When Mr. Nath is asking you to come to a meeting, are you mistaken that it is Mr. Nath calling you, or you know that it is Mr. Nath calling you for the meeting?
So Mr. Nath, I'm not mistaken that it's Mr. Nath because he asked to meet with me and he made the arrangements to meet with me.
So,
And because I've been engaging with him,
yes,
it was my understanding that I'm meeting with Mr. Nath.
yes. So you're not mistaken, as
No.
if you read incorrectly the request for the meeting. You understand what I'm saying?
No, I don't.
You didn't read incorrectly that, oh, I thought I was called to the meeting by Mr. Nath, but now I see the request was actually made by Mr. Tony Gupta. You follow?
But Mr. Gupta didn't make the request.
Yes, okay.
It was Mr. Nath who contacted me.
Okay.
It's just strange. It's just strange to me
That
how it would be possible to
Yeah.
have that kind of misunderstanding. Mr. Nath is the one you had been dealing with. I think from what you are saying now, you were not mistaken that the interactions or discussions you had had with him were to the effect that you were going to meet him. Am I right?
yes, that was my understanding.
Yeah, and one would have expected that if he was not going to meet with you, he would have said so expressly to say, look, there's a need for a meeting. It's Tony Gupta who wants to meet with you. I'm not going to be able to be there, but I'm just setting up the meeting. This is what he wants to talk to you about. One would have expected that to be something quite clear. Then have a situation where you come all the way on the basis that you are meeting this one person. Even as you are talking to Mr. Gupta, you keep on asking, where is this person? And he doesn't say, why do you keep on asking about that person? Because you are supposed to meet with me. He doesn't say that. You actually end up leaving and you are unhappy because you haven't met the person that you were supposed to meet. And he doesn't say, I'm sorry, you must have misunderstood. Didn't he tell you that you were going to meet with me? He doesn't say any of those things. Can you see what my difficulty is? The natural reaction one would have expected from him, if he knew that you were meant to meet with him and not with Mr. Nath, would be when you asked where Mr. Nath was, look, you are supposed to meet with me, not with Mr. Nath, or he's not coming, but I'm the one that you're supposed to meet with you. Didn't he tell you? That's what one would expect. But from what you have said, he kept on avoiding telling you about where Mr. Nath was until you left. Just the whole thing. It's strange that in the arrangements, you would think you were going to meet with Mr. Nath when actually that's not the arrangement. And then it's strange that when Mr. Tony Gupta was having this discussion with you, while you kept on saying, where is Mr. Nath? That's the person I'm supposed to meet. That he never says, no, but you are supposed to meet with me. I'm the right person that you are meeting. He doesn't say anything of that, but keeps on asking questions. And from what you say, it looks like he avoids giving you direct answers about Mr. Nath until you left and you are unhappy. You understand why I find it strange.
I hear you, Chairperson.
Yes. Okay, but in the end, maybe it might not be important. Mr. Sileka?
Dr. Nteta, do you know, to the extent that you say you gave only general information and you encourage Mr. Tony Gupta to engage with primary energy of Eskom, whether that happened? Did he engage with primary energy?
I don't know.
Okay, let's go into the second meeting then. Relate to the chairperson.
Let's not go to the second meeting because it's 5 o'clock now.
Oh, is it 5?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So let's go to the second meeting tomorrow morning at 10. Just make sure that Dr. Nteta has got a copy of the mandate that she talked about earlier. Just make sure that she has got a copy of the affidavit of Mr.
Bester.
Bester.
Yes.
And any other documents or affidavits that she may need to have sight of that may be relevant for her evidence tomorrow.
Yes, Chair.
Yes. We are going to adjourn now. Dr. Nteta, do come back at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Is that fine?
It's fine. Do I use the same link?
I think they will let you know, probably the same, but they will let you know. Yes. They'll contact you, the technicians will contact you. Okay, we'll then adjourn and then we'll resume tomorrow at 10.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn.
Thank you. Thank you.